Welcome to the Engineering Influence Podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. And today we're talking with Joe Bates, senior researcher with the ACEC Research Institute, on the new Q1 2026 Engineering Business Sentiment Report, which newly released from the ACEC Research Institute, of course. Q1 2026 coming as the latest on a very long series of quarterly business sentiment reports, where the Institute goes out and interviews CEOs from firms across the country, ACEC members, on the current and future expectations they have for the business and the macro economy. Joe, thanks again for joining us and to go over this report's results.
It's always a pleasure to be here, Jeff. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. Would love having you. So let's dig in to what we're seeing right now. Right now, we're seeing really the takeaway is the industry's coming at 2026, the beginning of the year, from a position of strength. Where are you seeing that resiliency coming from?
Yeah. So first of all, the top line number is the sentiment regarding the U.S. economy, and that has increased by 11 points, which honestly, I was a little bit surprised. We're at a plus 45 now, and we have only exceeded that last year in the first quarter when there was a lot of optimism around a potentially pro-business administration coming into office. So we are at a level that we really haven't seen since early last year. And it's pretty broad-based, but really what's underpinning that are firm finances and their continued resiliency. Even though we've seen perceptions of the economy going up and down really crazy over the last year, firm finances have been very steady. Industry sentiment has been pretty steady as well, and they're both extremely high. So that's really what's underpinning the strength of our industry right now. And the U.S. economy numbers, the reason those went up as much as they did was largely because of the small businesses and to some degree, medium-sized firms as well. So that's what I always talk about those firms being the canaries in the coal mine. And when they are feeling better, then we really feel more optimistic overall.
Yeah. It's interesting because you hear a lot of different reports in the news. You'll turn one channel and the economy is doing gangbusters. We're doing fantastic. You turn another and it's another story. People talk about, wage growth, or they talk about just the issue related to tariffs on small businesses. I mean, what are you seeing is really the driver there from the macroeconomic sense? I mean, the jobs numbers that came out were pretty good for the beginning of the year. What's really driving the confidence in the economy, and where do you see that going in the near term?
I think the confidence in the overall economy, it has gone up and down, and it's very much followed a lot of the political discussions, the political policies that we have. And that is what's driving the top line numbers on the U.S. economy. So it's concern about the U.S. political environment, and general economic concerns are still weighing on the minds of our firm leaders. But I think the other piece of that is that we're getting used to, and I'm not sure this is good or bad, but I'm just saying I feel like we're getting used to a bit more of ups and downs.
Yeah. This I guess is just human nature, right? I mean, if you have a bit of uncertainty, or you're it seems like we're riding a roller coaster to an extent. I mean, we haven't had a lot of dips, significant, but a lot of short, bumps in the process here, where you see some numbers come up, come down. You see the impact of tariffs and how they're going to be absorbed in the economy. You see the labor rate. You see all these different things. The affordability issue, of course, is becoming really a front burner issue politically leading into the midterms. All that together. I mean, we've seen this in the past, though. I mean, from our industry, when things are outside of our industry, going at different rates kind of sputtering, stopping. There's concerns about recession. Whether or not there's going to be, rate hikes at the Fed, or is the Fed going to act to, cut rates? There's a lot of instability out there, but our industry seems to have, has shown over time to weather these external events very well. And it's almost like they're buffered from.
Yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway from the entirety of our series, which we've been doing now for almost 5 years, is that we have seen a lot of different external factors that are affecting the overall US economy. But when we look at our concerns about, or rather optimism about the industry itself, it's always been very strong. And when we ask about how is your firm itself doing, very, very strong numbers. So I think when we look at the future sentiment, that's really colored by these outside influences. But as you know, we have now for 4.5 years been concerned about the future. But every time the future comes, we're feeling fine. So we are, I think, in a uniquely stable and growing industry. And part of that is in the data we collect, that we don't have enough people to fill all the jobs, honestly. And so we have very healthy backlog. It's not too much, right? I mean, firms are managing their backlogs appropriately. If anything, they're not taking on projects that they know we just can't do it right now. But if we had more workforce, if we had, and we see that in this study, firms are still hiring, they're still expecting to hire more people in the future. There seems to be no end in sight to a labor need within our industry.
Yeah, that has always been a constant throughout the last few quarters.
Yeah.
Has been the labor issue. Do you see any signs of easing? Has there been any noticeable change in the amount of open seats and kind of how firms are expected to fill or look for additional labor to do these projects?
Yeah, we have not really seen any change in the number of open positions. Very, very little, I should say. So, still 9 out of 10 firms have open positions. We've seen the total number of vacancies come down a little bit, but we still have more vacancies than we can fill. And people perceive that that will continue to change. But there is some good news, I think, in this quarter for firms, and that is that the wages that they are paying to keep their employees as well as to hire new employees, the increase year over year has come down just a little bit. So you remember when we first started tracking this about 4 years ago, it was 10% year over year increases in wages. And that's, was pretty hard for firms. We're now down to about 7% for existing staff and 6% for new hires. I mean, it's not as great as it could be. We're still seeing pretty, strong advances and increases there, but it's definitely better than those double digit increases that we were seeing.
Yeah. Which is a good signal. I mean,
Yeah.
deflationary pressure on, wages is good for firm leaders, of course. I mean, I remember post pandemic, it was really astronomically high, and seeing that will alleviate some pressure, definitely. Is there a larger concern on just the direction of federal policy and, how that might have an impact on, not looking long term, but like the next quarter, Q2, and what, we're doing right now in Washington related to, any number of things really. But I mean, it's become an issue where, we're going from shutdown to shutdown. We're looking at doing a surface bill this year that could definitely benefit the industry. I mean, that has a timestamp on it. The programs will expire if they're not extended, or if we don't have a new bill in place by a date certain. What's happening from a federal policy standpoint that could impact the industry?
Yeah, that's, I think, really interesting point here that we ask at the beginning of each year. So in Q1, what are your big concerns about the year ahead? And of course, we're still seeing wage concerns, which we just talked about. Although those concerns have definitely lessened, but they're still the top concern. But after that, it's disruptions due to funding lapses or government shutdowns, and that's we haven't asked that in the past because it wasn't an issue in the past, but it's near the top of the list, and I think it's a real concern for firms that, especially firms that are working with public sector clients, are these continued shutdowns, the uncertainty about whether we're going to have shutdowns, the uncertainty about what's happening with government funding. That seems to be bubbling up a little bit more to the surface. It's, again, not the number one issue, but it is definitely a concern for a lot of firm leaders right now.
It would be interesting to see in future surveys and to ask that question, because it seems that the time between when this survey went in to the field and as we started gathering, I mean, the results, I mean, we're seeing, if not full government shutdowns, we're seeing departmental shutdowns as we speak right now. DHS, aspects of DHS are now under a shutdown. Whether or not that volatility and willingness, it seems, by policymakers, lawmakers on both sides ends of Pennsylvania Avenue to allow a shutdown to happen, how's that going to have an impact on how the firms look at the macroeconomy moving forward? It'll be an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, and I think it is more of an issue of that perception of what's happening with the economy overall. I think firms, by and large, understand that these shutdowns will be temporary, that funding will be there, but it causes a lot of disruption and it does concern firm leaders, and understandably so.
Well, one area that you've asked about beforehand in previous surveys, and something that the Institute's working on a more broader strategic mission with part of the Firm of the Future program that you're working on, is of course AI adoption. And this is something which, of course, has been a hot topic for the industry for a while now. But I think that this survey kind of showed a pivot point, maybe, or a high watermark in firm adoption and implementation of AI. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, this has been really interesting. I was pretty surprised, Jeff, but I think we have hit an inflection point, at least with firms realizing they need a strategy. And that's the first place you have to start, right? You have to create a strategy. You have to map out how you're going to address AI, how you want to implement, how you want to think about implementing. So this is a really, it's nuanced, right? So what we saw in this quarter is that almost a majority of firms now have an AI strategy in place, and that's up 20 points from when we first started conducting the research on that question a couple years ago. So that is really, really good news. And the percentage of firms that haven't even started is really low now. It's a minority, and it's a smaller and smaller minority. So I think our messaging, as well as just the reality of AI and the effect it's having on businesses, is working. Firms are realizing, okay, we've got to at least have a strategy in place. But the nuance is that in the fourth quarter of last year, we asked about implementation, and still the vast majority of firms are testing the waters. There are only a small percentage of firms who are really moving full force into widespread implementation. And that makes sense. I mean, again, first you have to have your strategy in place. Then you have to start figuring out where you're going to test, where you're going to have your pilot projects. You have to have those things actually go get in place and see how they work out. And then you start to spread, implementation farther. So the good news is we're seeing movement, and that is very, very encouraging compared to where we were 1 and 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how this has developed, because at the beginning it was kind of the shadow looming over all industries, what AI is and how it could disrupt things. That has kind of crystallized into firms, some of them getting out of the gate early and putting in the strategy to deal with it. Now we're seeing a plurality of firms actually putting in a strategy, 47% in this survey having a strategy, and then, you have 82% of firms over 500 FTEs who have an AI policy in place. And then another interesting statistic was the average workforce adaptability of 58%. Now, explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, this was a really interesting question that one of our members actually suggested we ask, and I thought it was a great question. So one of our members said, "Hey, we'd love to know how well prepared our staff." So we asked the question, and I'm paraphrasing, but how well do you think your staff are adapted, or what percentage of your staff do you feel have the necessary capabilities to adapt to these coming changes? And so to see at least, almost 60% of staff being ready to adapt to changes, I thought that was encouraging. I mean, would love to be at 100%, but, having more than half of staff being ready, I think that's really good. So I was very happy to see that. One point I want to go back to is that we are still seeing small firms, the smallest firms with fewer than 25 FTE. They're still lagging a bit in creating strategies, figuring out how to address AI going forward. And so I think we have to continue to place emphasis on helping smaller firms prepare for the AI revolution that we see coming.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that there's a lot that's happening on the ACEC side of things, the technology committee doing work trying to get that broad based level of support throughout the industry for AI adoption and implementation, especially with the smaller firms. I think that there's a very low barrier of entry when it comes to AI. The problem is implementing it correctly, and that's where we need to come in and help.
Yeah, I think so. We talk about the firm of the future and all the work we're doing on the firm of the future initiatives. And we're doing a lot of interviews right now with some of the leading firms as well as the leading suppliers about how AI is going to come together with the workforce challenges of the future and the needs of the workforce. What does that mean? And what I'm hearing in these interviews consistently, time and time again, is that small firms are not at a disadvantage, that there are tools that can be used to help democratize the playing field. And it really is a matter of having the time, because obviously a small firm doesn't have as many people, but having the time, taking the time, and dedicating some resources to figuring out how to utilize AI to benefit the firm, because it can make a big difference. I've heard experts talk about the fact that they see a future where a 10-person firm can compete with a 200-person firm if they're properly utilizing AI. So that's a game changer in my book.
It is, and there is research that the institutes put out there about AI and its impact on firms and how firms are approaching it, which is available up on the website. And then, of course, Firm of the Future, new AI study and a new workforce study, and then working on the synthesis of those two studies and seeing how those two items are interacting and impacting the industry. That's a project that's ongoing. Joe, give us a little bit more about that and kind of what else the institute's working on.
Yeah, so that study that you're talking about, we are working on in conjunction with Mike Walsh, who is a futurist. He will be compiling a report on that. We'll be releasing that at Spring Convention in May. He'll also be doing a short intro video for us. So if you're there at Spring Convention, you'll see that on the main stage. And then I'll be talking about a few of the highlights from that finding, or the findings from that study, rather. And we're going to have a breakout session at convention about that study. And this is really meant to take the ideas, what could be, and provide a more concrete set of initiatives or roadmap that any firm can take. And maybe it will be different for smaller firms versus mid-size and large firms. But the idea is to create a resource document that will help firms to start to implement, not just create strategies now, but start implementing AI. So that's a big thing we're working on this spring. We're also working on value-based pricing study, because obviously AI changes the nature of the work that an engineering firm is going to do. And you can't really bill by the hour anymore. You're investing in this technology that is a force multiplier, and you have to start to figure out how can you capture the value of your services, and are there other services you can provide with AI that you couldn't provide before. So that's going to be coming over the summer. And then we're also looking at what's the risk of AI. Where do you need to be looking within your firm in all different areas, legal, HR, engineering itself. What are the risks associated with AI, and how can you mitigate those risks? How can you adapt to those risks? So we've got a lot going on this year, Jeff, and that's just the first half.
It's going to be a very busy year for the Institute. So, Joe, I appreciate you taking the time out to go into depth on some of the results. Encourage everyone to click on the link in the show notes that will take you to Q1. Also on the Institute website, you can, to Joe's point, we've been doing years of these, multiple quarters. You can take a look at some historical data, all available on the Institute's website. Joe, thanks again.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me.
And again, this has been the Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. And we'll see you next time.